Move. The command came from the Alpha King himself, sharp and absolute, the kind of order that had brought entire packs to their knees. But the 6 elite warriors of the Nightborn Guard did not move. They stood frozen, their eyes locked not on their king, but on the small, silent figure standing 20 feet away. Sarah did not speak. She had never spoken. But when she tilted her head ever so slightly, and her gray eyes met theirs, the warriors turned as one and walked toward her, leaving their king standing alone in the center of the courtyard. The silence that followed was deafening. Kyle Nightborn, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, ruler of 12 packs and commander of the most powerful wolves in existence, watched as his own hand-picked guard obeyed a girl who had not made a single sound. His wolf surged forward in his chest, not with rage, but with something far more primal. Recognition. The kind that made his blood sing and his very bones ache with a need he had never experienced before. This was impossible. This was dangerous. This was everything he had been searching for without knowing it. Sarah had not meant to call them. She never meant to do any of the things that happened around her, the strange occurrences that made the other Omegas whisper, and the higher-ranked wolves avoid her like she carried disease. She had simply been walking past the visiting delegation, trying to make herself as invisible as possible the way she had learned to do over. 22 years of being the pack's silent outcast, when she felt the pull. It was the same feeling she got sometimes, a tightness in her chest that demanded release, a want that built and built, until reality itself seemed to bend around the edges. She had wanted the warriors to move away from the doorway she needed to pass through. She had wanted it with the kind of intensity that made her skin prickle, and her wolf, the one she had never successfully shifted into, stir restlessly in the prison of her human form. And they had moved, all 6 of them, away from their king, toward her. Now every eye in the courtyard was on her, and Sarah felt the familiar burn of panic rising in her throat. She could not explain. She could never explain. Her hands moved in the sign language she had learned from the old healer who had taken pity on her. But most wolves did not understand it, did not care to learn the language of someone they considered broken. Her fingers formed the shapes for apology, for accident, for please. But the Alpha King was already moving toward her, and the way he moved made something deep inside her chest crack open like an egg, spilling warmth and terror in equal measure. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. Tall and broad-shouldered with black hair that looked like it had been touched by midnight itself, and eyes that shifted between deep amber and molten gold depending on how close his wolf was to the surface. Right now, they were burning. Gold. And they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to run and stay perfectly still at the same time. "What is your name?" His voice was different now, not commanding but curious. And underneath the curiosity was something else. Something that made the air between them feel thick and electric. Sarah's hands moved automatically, spelling out the letters of her name in the air, but he was watching her face, not her hands. "You cannot speak." It was not a question. He said it like he was reading something written on her skin, like he could see truths that she had spent her entire life trying to hide. She shook her head, and the small motion seemed to satisfy something in him, because he took another step closer, close enough now that she could smell him. Pine and winter snow and something wild that made her wolf, her dormant, useless wolf, suddenly push against her consciousness like it wanted out for the first time in years. "But you can command." Again, not a question. An observation that landed between them like a stone in still water, sending ripples of consequence in every direction. Behind the Alpha King, his warriors had stopped their approach to Sarah, looking confused and vaguely horrified at their own actions. The largest one, a man with a scar running down his jaw, and the build of someone who had won far too many fights, was staring at his own hands like they had betrayed him. "Your Majesty, I do not know what..." He trailed off, unable to explain what had just happened, because there was no explanation. not one that made sense, not one that did not sound like madness. Kyle held up one hand without looking away from Sarah, silencing the warrior with the gesture. "It is not your fault, Marcus. You were compelled. True compulsion, not the artificial command of alpha authority, but something older. Something I have only read about in texts so ancient that most scholars believe them to be myth." He was speaking to his guard, but his words were meant for Sarah, and she felt them land like touches against her skin. The first wolves did not need words. They did not need to speak or growl or establish dominance through volume. They simply willed the world to obey, and it did. Their power came from something deeper than vocal cords and sound waves. It came from the soul of the wolf itself, from the place where instinct and magic are the same thing. Sarah wanted to shake her head, to deny what he was saying, because it was impossible. She was nobody. She was the Omega that even other Omegas pitied. She was the girl who had been found abandoned on the border with nothing but a blanket and a strange mark on her shoulder blade that looked like a crescent moon intersecting with a star. She was broken. Everyone had always told her she was broken. But the Alpha King was looking at her like she was anything but broken, and the intensity of his gaze made her knees feel weak. "Show me your shoulder." The command was soft, almost gentle. But it was still a command, and Sarah's body responded before her mind could catch up. She turned slowly, reaching back to pull aside the loose collar of her worn tunic, revealing the mark that had been with her since birth. She heard the sharp intake of breath, heard the muttered curse in a language she did not recognize, and then she felt fingertips against her skin, tracing the lines of the mark with a reverence that made her shiver. The lunar sigil, the mark of the firstborn bloodline. "I thought your line was extinct. We all did. The last great war wiped out every known descendant 300 years ago, or so the histories claim." Sarah pulled away from his touch, turning to face him again, and she could see the conflict playing across his features, wonder and desire and something that looked almost like fear, though she could not imagine what an Alpha King would have to fear from someone like her. Her hands moved in the sign for question, for confusion, for "I do not understand any of this." A voice came from the edge of the courtyard, smooth and feminine, and dripping with barely concealed disdain. "How fascinating that you have found a mute Omega with delusions of grandeur, Your Majesty. Perhaps we should return to the actual purpose of your visit before we are distracted further by local curiosities." Lady Vivian Ashford stepped into the sunlight, and Sarah felt the immediate weight of her disapproval. Vivian was everything Sarah was not. Tall and elegant, with auburn hair that fell in perfect waves and green eyes that sparkled with intelligence and barely concealed ambition. She was the daughter of the Ashford Alpha, one of the most powerful packs in the Eastern Territories, and she had been angling to become Kyle's queen since they were both teenagers. Everyone knew it. Everyone expected it. It was only a matter of time before the official announcement, but Kyle did not look at Vivian. He kept his eyes on Sarah, and there was something in his expression that made Vivian's smile tighten at the corners. "The purpose of my visit just became significantly more complicated, Lady Ashford. This woman—" He paused, and Sarah saw him struggle with what to call her, how to categorize something that defied categorization. "This woman may be the key to understanding the attacks that have been plaguing our territories. The rogues have been operating with unusual coordination, moving in patterns that suggest someone or something is directing them with a precision that should not be possible. If she truly carries the bloodline of the firstborn, if she possesses even a fraction of their abilities, then she could be either our salvation or our destruction, depending on whose hands she falls into. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one." Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet, felt the entire trajectory of her small, invisible life suddenly veer in a direction she could not have predicted even in her wildest imaginings. She had spent 22 years trying not to be noticed, trying to exist in the spaces between attention, and now the most powerful wolf in the realm was telling her she might be important. might be dangerous, might be something other than the broken, silent thing everyone had always believed her to be. She wanted to laugh, but no sound came out, only the slight shaking of her shoulders that might have been mirth or might have been the beginning of hysteria. Vivian's voice cut through the moment like a blade. You cannot possibly be suggesting that this creature has any real power, Kale. Look at her. She is barely Omega rank. She cannot even shift properly, from what I understand. The mark on her shoulder is probably just a birthmark that coincidentally resembles an ancient symbol. You are seeing patterns where there are none, because you want to believe there is some simple answer to our problems. Test her. The words came from Marcus, the scarred warrior who had been first to follow Sarah's unspoken command. He looked uncomfortable speaking out of turn, but determination overrode his natural deference to hierarchy. With respect, Lady Ashford, I have served the king for 15 years. I have faced down rogue attacks and challenged alphas and defended our borders against threats that would make lesser wolves flee. I do not break commands. I do not follow anyone but my king. But when that girl looked at me, when she wanted me to move, I could not have resisted if my life had depended on it. It was not suggestion. It was not persuasion. It was absolute. Like my wolf recognized an authority that superseded even alpha dominance. I have never felt anything like it, and I do not believe it was coincidence. Kale nodded slowly, and Sarah saw the wheels turning behind his eyes, saw him calculating possibilities and risks with the speed of someone who had been making life and death decisions since he was barely old enough to understand what death meant. We will test her. Carefully. Under controlled conditions. But first, I need to speak with Alpha Garrett about his Omega, and why he never thought to mention that he had someone with such unique characteristics living in his pack. There was an edge to his voice now, the kind of edge that suggested Alpha Garrett of the Silverstone pack was about to have a very unpleasant conversation. Sarah wanted to protest, wanted to defend the Alpha who had at least allowed her to stay even if he had never exactly welcomed her. But before she could move her hands to sign anything, she felt it. The pull. Stronger this time, more insistent, like a rope tied around her ribs yanking her toward something she could not see. Her head snapped to the left, toward the tree line beyond the courtyard, and her vision seemed to sharpen and narrow until she could see individual leaves rustling in patterns that were not quite natural. Someone was out there. Someone was watching. Someone had been waiting for exactly this moment, for the revelation of what she was, and now they were making their move. Sarah's hand shot out without conscious thought, grabbing Kale's wrist, her fingers wrapping around the leather bracer he wore with a grip that was probably too tight to be polite, but she could not make herself let go. She pointed toward the trees, her other hand moving frantically in signs that he could not possibly understand. But he did not need to understand the words. He understood the urgency. His entire body went rigid, his wolf rising so close to the surface that his eyes bled to full gold, and the air around him seemed to shimmer with barely contained power. Marcus, Torin, flank left, Jace, Vera, take the right approach. No one moves alone. No one engages without my signal. The commands were crisp and immediate, and his warriors moved to obey with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had fought together for years. But before they could reach the tree line, before anyone could investigate what Sarah had sensed, the attack came. They poured out of the forest like shadows given form, at least 20 rogues moving with the kind of synchronized precision that Kale had mentioned earlier, the kind that should not be possible for wolves who had no pack, no alpha, no structure. They were gaunt and wild-eyed, but they moved like a single organism, targeting the weakest points in the courtyard's defenses, with tactical awareness that made Sarah's blood run cold. These were not mindless beasts. These were soldiers, and they were coming straight for her. Sarah had never been in a real fight. She had never needed to be. Omegas did not fight. They hid. They submitted. They survived by being beneath notice. But when the first rogue broke through the line of defenders and lunged toward her with claws extended and teeth bared, something inside her snapped. Not broke. snapped into place, like a bone, setting after being dislocated for too long. She did not think. She did not plan. She simply wanted him to stop, wanted it with every fiber of her being. And the rogue stopped, mid-lunge, mid-air. He froze like someone had pressed pause on his existence, his body suspended in a position that defied physics and gravity, his expression locked in a snarl that would have been terrifying if it was not so utterly, completely still. The fighting around her stuttered to a halt as wolves on both sides stopped to stare at the impossible sight. Sarah could feel the power flowing out of her like water from a broken dam, could feel it connecting her to every wolf in the courtyard, rogue and pack member alike. She could feel their hearts beating, feel their wolves howling beneath their skin, feel the intricate web of instinct and hierarchy and pack bonds that held them all together. And she could feel how easy it would be to pull those threads, to make them dance to music only she could hear. The thought terrified her. The thought exhilarated her. The thought made her wolf, her dormant, supposedly broken wolf, suddenly surge forward with a force that drove Sarah to her knees. "Everyone down!" Cale's voice cut through the chaos, and every pack member dropped immediately, pressing themselves flat against the ground in a show of submission that would have been humiliating under any other circumstances. The rogues, lacking an alpha to command them, hesitated just long enough for Sarah to understand what Cale had done. He had cleared the field, given her space, trusted her to do something even she did not know if she could do. The power built in her chest like pressure behind a dam, like thunder trapped in a bottle. And when it finally released, it came out not as sound, but as pure, undiluted will. Stop. The word existed only in her mind, but every rogue in the courtyard heard it. She knew they heard it because they stopped. All of them. Frozen like statues, their bodies locked. In whatever position they had been in when her command hit them. Some were mid-strike. Some were mid-retreat. One was caught mid-shift, his body trapped in the agonizing in-between state of human and wolf, neither one nor the other. Sarah could feel the strain of holding them, could feel her power stretched thin across too many targets, and she knew she could not maintain this for long. Her hands moved desperately, signing to Cale even though she knew he was still pressed flat against the ground. Knew he could not see her. She spelled out the word, bind, over and over, hoping someone would understand, would know what to do, because she could feel the rogues fighting against her hold, feel them pushing back against her will with a collective force that made her head pound and her vision blur at the edges. Silver chains. Now! Cale was on his feet in an instant, barking orders to his warriors who moved with impressive speed to restrain the frozen rogues. Silver-burned werewolves, weakened. Them made it impossible for them to shift or use their enhanced strength. Within minutes, all 20 rogues were bound in chains that glowed with an eerie luminescence, and only then did Sarah allow herself to release her hold. The power snapped back into her like a rubber band, and the force of it knocked her backward. She would have hit the ground hard if Cale had not been there, his arms wrapping around her and pulling her against his chest, steadying her while the world spun, and her body shook with the aftermath of using abilities she had not known she possessed. "I have you. You are safe. Breathe." His voice was low and close to her ear, and she could feel the rumble of it in his chest, could feel the rapid beating of his heart that betrayed how affected he was, despite his calm exterior. She turned her face into his shoulder, not caring that it was probably improper, not caring that Vivienne was watching from somewhere nearby with an expression that could have curdled milk. She just needed something solid to hold on to, while her entire understanding of herself and her place in the world shattered and reformed into something new. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below. Get them to the holding cells. I want guards on rotation, no less than 4 at a time. And someone get me a truth seer. These rogues are going to tell us who sent them, and how they found us here. And they are going to tell us today. Cale's commands were efficient. And absolute. But his arms did not loosen around Sarah. did not let her go even as his warriors moved to carry out his orders. She could feel him breathing against her hair, could feel the tension in his body that suggested his wolf was even closer to the surface than usual, riding the high of battle in something else, the mate bond. She knew what it was now. She could feel it between them like a living thing, like a bridge made of starlight and inevitability. He was hers. She was his. The Ka. Knowledge was written in every cell of her body, undeniable and absolute. But knowing it and accepting it were two very different things. Sarah pulled back slowly, putting space between them, even though her body protested the distance. And she saw the flash of something almost like hurt cross his features before he masked it behind the neutral expression of a king. You need rest. You need food. You need to be checked by a healer to make sure that kind of power expenditure did not damage you. Internally. He was right, of course. She could feel the exhaustion creeping through her limbs, could feel the hollow ache in her chest that suggested she had burned through energy reserves she did not know she had. But she could not rest. Not yet. Not when there were too many questions and not enough answers. Her hands moved, signing quickly. Who wants me? Why now? What do they want to use me for? Cale watched her hands, his brow furrowed in concentration, and she realized he was actually trying to understand, trying to learn her language on the fly because he wanted to communicate with her properly. The realization made something warm bloom in her chest. I do not know yet, but we will find out. I promise you that. His hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture so gentle and unexpected that she froze, her eyes going wide. You are not alone in this anymore, Sarah. Whatever is coming, whatever danger you are in, you have the full protection of the Nightborn pack behind you. You have me. How touching. Vivian's voice was acid-sweet as she approached, her perfect composure back in place despite the chaos that had just unfolded. The king and his new pet project. How very noble of you, Kyle, to take responsibility for this lost little Omega. Though I do wonder how appropriate it is for you to be holding her quite so intimately when there are pressing matters that require your attention. The summit with the Eastern Alphas is in 3 days, or have you forgotten? We have alliances to solidify, treaties to negotiate. You cannot afford to be distracted by every shiny new toy that crosses your path. The dismissal in her tone made Sarah's wolf snarl inside her chest, a sound that had no voice, but that Sarah felt all the way down to her bones. Cale's expression went cold, the warmth that had been there moments ago, disappearing behind a mask of regal displeasure that would have been terrifying if it had been directed at her. Lady Ashford, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. What you call a distraction may very well be the key to preventing a war that would cost thousands of lives. And what you call a pet project is my mate. I would advise you to show her the respect that station demands. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah stopped breathing. Vivian went pale, then red, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. The warriors who were close enough to hear went very still, their expressions carefully neutral in the way of people who knew they were witnessing something significant and potentially dangerous. Kyle had just publicly declared Sarah as his mate. Not his potential mate. Not someone he was considering. His mate. Final. Absolute. Inarguable. It was the kind of declaration that could not be taken back, the kind that would send ripples through every pack in the territories. The Alpha King had found his queen, and she was a mute Omega that nobody had ever heard of. Vivian recovered her composure with visible effort, her smile returning but sharper now, edged with something that looked like malice, hiding beneath a veneer of civility. Of course. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I was not aware that you had confirmed your mate bond. How wonderful for you both. I am sure the other alphas will be thrilled to hear that their king has chosen so unexpectedly. I look forward to seeing how this development affects the summit negotiations. She turned and walked away before Cale could respond, her spine rigid and her steps precise, and Sarah did not need to be able to hear her thoughts to know that she had just made a very dangerous enemy. Kale seemed to sense her worry, because his hand moved to the small of her back, a steadying presence that grounded her. Vivienne will adjust. She has always known that political matches are not guaranteed. Her pride is wounded, nothing more. But Sarah was not so sure. She had spent her entire life learning to read people through their body language and micro-expressions, learning to survive in a world where she could not ask questions or defend herself with words. And what she had seen in Vivienne's eyes before the other woman turned away was not wounded pride. It was calculation. It was the look of someone who had just decided that if she could not have what she wanted, she would make very sure that no one else could have it either. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity that Sarah watched from the sidelines, feeling useless and overwhelmed in equal measure. Kyle had assigned 2 of his warriors, the female beta named Vera and a younger male named Luca, to stay with her at all times, ostensibly for her protection, but also, she suspected, to keep an eye on her in case she accidentally compelled someone else. She did not blame him for the caution. She did not trust herself either. Every time someone came too close or moved too quickly, she felt the power stir inside her, felt the urge to reach out and make them stop, make them slow down, make them whatever she needed them to be in that moment. It was intoxicating and horrifying, like being given the keys to a weapon she had no idea how to use safely. Vera seemed to sense her discomfort, because the older woman offered her a smile that was surprisingly kind, considering the circumstances. It gets easier. Learning to control your wolf, learning to manage your power. Right now, everything is new and raw, but with training, it will become second nature. The king will make sure you have the best teachers available. Sarah wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that there was a path forward that did not end in disaster. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those rogues frozen in midair, saw the terror in their eyes as they realized they could not move, could not fight back, could not do anything but wait for whatever she decided to do with them. That kind of power should not exist. That kind of power was the reason the firstborn had been hunted to. Extinction, according to the histories Kale had mentioned. People feared what they could not fight against, and you could not fight against someone who could simply will you to stop existing in any meaningful way. A commotion from the direction of the pack house drew her attention, and she saw Alpha Garrett striding toward them, his expression thunderous, and his beta flanking him on both sides. Garrett was not an unkind man, but he was traditional and set in his ways, and the look on his face suggested he was about to have a conversation he would rather avoid. "Your Majesty, might I have a word? In private?" His eyes flicked to Sarah for just a moment, and she saw the confusion and accusation there. He had given her shelter for 22 years, had allowed her to exist on the fringes of his pack, and now she had revealed herself to be something he had never anticipated. Something dangerous. Kyle's expression was unreadable as he nodded. "Of course, Alpha Garrett. My study. Now." The 2 men walked away, their body language stiff and formal, and Sarah felt her stomach twist with anxiety. She had no idea what Kale would say, no idea how Garrett would react, no idea if this was the moment where everything she had ever known would be ripped away from her. Luca must have seen something in her expression, because he cleared his throat awkwardly. "The king will not let anything happen to you. He does not make declarations lightly, especially not about mates. You are under his protection now, which means you are untouchable. Alpha Garrett knows this. He would not dare try to challenge it. But Sarah knew it was not that simple. Garrett did not need to challenge Kale directly to make her life difficult. He could simply make it clear that she was no longer welcome in Silverstone, that her presence was a disruption to his pack's harmony. And where would she go then? She had never been anywhere else. This was the only home she had ever known, even if it had never quite felt like home. An hour later, Kale returned, and the grim set of his jaw told Sarah everything she needed to know before he spoke. "Pack your belongings. You are coming with me to the Nightborn territory." Alpha Garrett has agreed that it is in everyone's best interest for you to be trained and protected in a place that can handle the security concerns your abilities present. You will leave with us tomorrow at dawn." It was not a request. It was not even really a command. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered in a tone that suggested there was no room for argument. Sarah felt the ground drop out from under her. Leave? Tomorrow? Go to a place she had never seen, full of wolves she did not know, away from the only familiar corners of the world she had managed to carve out for herself. Her hands moved frantically, signing objections and questions and fears faster than even someone fluent in sign language could have followed. But Cale caught her hands gently, stilling them, between his own. "I know this is frightening. I know you do not want to leave. But someone just sent 20 rogues to attack you specifically, Sarah. They knew what you were. They knew where to find you. And they will try again. Silverstone is not equipped to defend against that level of threat. The Nightborn Fortress is. You will be safe there. I will make sure of it." Safe. The word should have been comforting, but all Sarah could think about was how many times in her life people had promised her safety, and then failed to deliver. The couple who had found her as a baby had promised to keep her until they could no longer afford another mouth to feed. The first family who had taken her in had promised she would be treated like one of their own until their biological children started complaining about the weird girl who could not talk. Garrett had promised she would have a place in the pack as long as she did not cause trouble. And now she was being sent away because she had turned out to be more trouble than anyone could have anticipated. She pulled her hands free from Kyle's grip and stepped back, shaking her head, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. She had learned a long time ago that crying did not help, that it only made people uncomfortable and eager to look away. But Kyle did not look away. He closed the distance between them again, his hands coming up to frame her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I am not them. I am not the people who let you down. Before, when I make a promise, I keep it. You are my mate, Sarah. That is not a temporary designation. That is not conditional. That means I will fight for you, kill for you, die for you if necessary. And I will never, ever send you away. You are coming to Nightborn because that is where I live, and mates stay together. Do you understand? If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on." She wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to. Trust in the certainty she could see in his eyes, wanted to lean into the warmth of his touch, and let someone else carry the weight of decisions for a while. But trust was not something that came easily to her, not after a lifetime of learning that people left, that promises broke, that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. Still, she did not have much choice. Staying in Silverstone was clearly not an option anymore, and going to Nightborn at least came with the protection of someone powerful enough to defend her. She nodded slowly, a small, reluctant gesture of acceptance, and she saw relief flash across Cale's features. "Good. We leave at dawn. Pack light. Anything you need that you do not have, we will provide. For tonight you will stay in the guest quarters under guard. I am not taking any chances with your safety." He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture of intimacy that made her breath catch. "I know you do not trust me yet. I know I have to earn that, but I will, Sarah. I promise you, I will." That night, Sarah barely slept. She lay in the unfamiliar bed of the Packhouse's guest room, staring at the ceiling while her mind raced through everything that had happened, everything that had changed in the span of a single day. She had gone from invisible Omega to the Alpha King's declared mate. She had discovered she carried the bloodline of beings most wolves considered myth. She had used power she did not understand to stop an attack that should have killed her. And tomorrow, she would leave the only home she had ever known to go live in a fortress with a man she barely knew, bound to him by a connection she could feel, but did not fully comprehend. Her wolf was restless inside her, pacing like a caged animal, and Sarah could feel the pressure building under her skin, the need to shift finally strong enough to be undeniable. She had tried to shift before, dozens of times when she was younger, desperate to prove she was. Not broken, not wrong, not less than every other wolf in the pack. But it had never worked. Her body would ache and burn. Her bones would creak like they wanted to reshape themselves. But the transformation never came. She had learned to stop trying, learned to accept that she would always be stuck in this in-between state. Too wolf to be fully human, but too human to be fully wolf. But tonight, with power thrumming through her veins and the mate bond pulling at her consciousness like a tide, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, things were different now. She slid out of bed, moving quietly to the center of the room, and closed her eyes. She did not know how to do this properly, had never been taught the meditation techniques or breathing exercises that helped young wolves learn to shift smoothly. She only knew how to want, how to need, how to command reality to bend to her will. So she wanted. She wanted her wolf form with the same intensity she had wanted the rogues to stop, the same intensity she had wanted the warriors to move. She wanted it so badly that her whole body shook with the force of it, wanted it until the air around her seemed to shimmer and warp. And then, finally, blessedly, painfully, it happened. Her bones cracked and reformed, her muscles stretched and contracted, her skin prickled as fur erupted across every surface. The pain was immense, worse than anything she had ever felt. But underneath the pain was something else. Joy. Pure, undiluted, overwhelming. Joy as her body finally became what it was always meant to be. When the transformation finished, Sarah found herself standing on 4 legs instead of 2. Her senses exploded into sharp clarity. She could smell everything. The lingering scent of the warriors who had stood guard outside her door. The faint trace of Kale from where he had touched her earlier. The musk of the pack house and the forest beyond. She could hear the night creatures moving through the underbrush. Could hear heartbeats and breathing from rooms both near and far, and she could feel her wolf, not as a separate entity trapped inside her, but as an integrated part of herself, whole and complete for the first time in her life. She wanted to run, wanted to test this new body and see what it could do, but before she could move toward the window, she heard it. Voices. Low and secretive, coming from just outside her door. She padded closer, her paws silent on the wooden floor, and pressed her ear against the crack. It has to be tonight. Once she leaves for Nightborn, we will never get another chance. The king is too well guarded, his fortress too secure. The voice was female, cultured, and terribly familiar. Vivian. I do not like this. Killing her outright will make us enemies of the Alpha King. He has already declared her his mate. The second voice was male, older, and tinged with hesitation. Then we do not kill her outright. We make it look like an accident. Or better yet, we take her. Alive, and deliver her to those who will pay handsomely for a firstborn they can control. Either way, she cannot be allowed to bond with Kale. If she becomes queen, if she has access to that kind of power and that kind of position, she could reshape the entire hierarchy of packs. Our carefully laid plans, our alliances, our investments in the current power structure, all of it becomes meaningless. There was a pause, and then Vivian's voice dropped even lower, cold and calculating. Besides, do you really think that little Omega is suited to be queen? She cannot even speak. She has no training, no sophistication, no understanding of politics or diplomacy. She would be a disaster, an embarrassment. I am doing Kale a favor, really. Saving him from a mistake he will come to regret once the novelty of the mate bond wears off. Sarah felt rage bubble up inside her, hot and fierce, and her wolf responded to it, power flooding through her limbs until the air around her crackled with barely contained energy. These people, these traitors, thought they could take her, use her, dispose of her like she was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. They thought she was weak. They thought she was helpless. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. She did not think about consequences, or strategy, or the fact that she had shifted for the first time mere minutes ago and had no idea how to fight in this form. She simply acted. Her wolf form was larger than she had expected, nearly the size of a full-grown beta, with fur that was pure silver white and eyes that glowed with an eerie pale light. She hit the door with her shoulder, and it splintered like kindling, exploding outward in a shower of wood fragments that sent the two conspirators stumbling backward in shock. Vivian's eyes went wide with genuine fear for the first time since Sarah had met her, and the man beside her, someone Sarah recognized as one of Garrett's senior advisors, reached for the silver dagger at his belt. But before either of them could move, before they could scream or run or do anything, Sarah's power lashed out like a whip, freezing them both in place. She stalked forward, her lips pulled back from her teeth in a snarl that was perfectly audible even though her human voice had never worked. Her wolf had a voice, and her wolf was done being silent. The growl that rumbled from her chest was low and menacing, and she felt a savage satisfaction at the way Vivian trembled. The way the advisor's face went pale as death. "Sarah! Stand down!" Cale's voice cut through the red haze of her anger, and she turned to see him running down the hallway, his own eyes blazing gold, his body poised for violence. But when he saw the scene, saw Vivian and the advisor frozen in obvious guilt, saw the splintered door and Sarah in her wolf form for the first time, he stopped short. Understanding flashed across his features, quickly followed by cold fury. "Explain. Now. And choose your words. Carefully, because they may be the last you speak." His command was directed at Vivian, and Sarah released her hold just enough to let the other woman's jaw work. Vivian tried to salvage the situation, her mind clearly racing for a plausible excuse. "Your Majesty, this is all a misunderstanding. We were merely discussing concerns about security, and when we heard a noise from the room, we were investigating. The Omega attacked us without provocation. But Sarah had heard enough lies to last a lifetime, and she was not about to let this one stand." She shifted back to human form, the transformation smoother this time, easier now that her wolf had finally been freed. She stood naked in the hallway, not caring about modesty, her hands moving in rapid, furious signs that she knew Cale still could not fully read. But she did not need him to read the words. She needed him to see the truth. Vera appeared at Cale's shoulder, took one look at Sarah's signs, and her expression hardened. "She says they were planning to kidnap her tonight, Your Majesty. Planning to either kill her or sell her to someone who wants to control a firstborn." She heard them outside the door discussing it. Kyle went very, very still, the kind of stillness that preceded volcanic eruptions. When he spoke, his voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he had shouted. "Lady Ashford, Advisor Cornelius, you are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit treason and attempted murder of the future queen. You will be taken to the holding cells to await trial. And if I find even a shred of evidence that confirms what you have been accused of, your deaths will be slow enough that you will beg for mercy long before the end comes." He gestured, and his warriors moved forward to restrain the two conspirators, silver chains appearing from somewhere to bind them securely. Vivian tried to protest, tried to claim her innocence, but Cale silenced her with a look. "Save your pleas for the trial. You will have opportunity to present your defense then, though I suspect the truth-seer will make that defense rather difficult to maintain." After the conspirators had been dragged away, and someone had found a robe to wrap around Sarah's shaking form, Cale pulled her into his study and closed the door firmly behind them. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his expression cycling through a dozen emotions too quickly for her to name them all. Then he crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You shifted. You actually shifted, and you heard them. If you had not heard them, if they had succeeded. He did not finish the sentence, just held her tighter, and Sarah felt the tremor that ran through him, felt the fear he was trying to hide beneath his kingly composure. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes, and her hands moved in the sign for safe, for protected, for I am here. He caught her hands, brought them to his lips, and kissed her knuckles with a gentleness that made her chest ache. I am learning your language. Vera is teaching me. By the time we reach Nightborn, I will be able to understand everything you say. You will never have to struggle to communicate with me, I swear it. The journey to Nightborn territory took 3 days of hard travel through increasingly rugged terrain. Sarah rode beside Kyle on a horse she barely knew how to control, flanked by his warriors who had closed ranks. Around her like a living shield. They passed through dense forests and over mountain passes, crossed rivers swollen with spring melt, and traversed meadows that stretched out like green oceans. With every mile they traveled, Sarah felt the pull of Silverstone weakening, felt the invisible threads that had tied her to her old life stretching thin and finally snapping. She should have felt sad, should have felt the loss of the only home she had ever known, but instead, she felt something else. Anticipation. The sense that she was moving towards something rather than away from something. That the future opening up before her held possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Kale kept close to her throughout the journey, never more than a few feet away, and she could feel the mate bond between them growing stronger with every passing hour. It was like a living thing, warm and insistent, pulling them together with an inevitability that was both comforting and terrifying. By the time they crested the final ridge and the Nightborn fortress came into view, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was massive, built into the side of a mountain with towers that reached toward the sky and walls that looked thick enough to withstand a siege from an army. Torches burned along the ramparts, and she could see the silhouettes of guards patrolling in precise patterns. This was not just a pack house. This was a stronghold, a seat of power that had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more. This was where she would live now, where she would learn to control her abilities, where she would stand beside Kyle as his mate, and eventually, his queen. The thought should have been overwhelming. But as they rode through the massive gates and into the courtyard where dozens of wolves had gathered to greet their returning king, Sarah felt something else settle in her chest. Not fear, not uncertainty, but a quiet, growing conviction that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Kale dismounted and reached up to help her down, his hands spanning her waist, and when her feet touched the ground, he did not immediately let go. Instead, he leaned down until his forehead pressed against hers, until they were sharing breath, and whispered words meant only for her. Welcome home, Sarah. Welcome to Nightborn. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity and learning. Kyle assigned her a suite of rooms in the royal wing, chambers so luxurious they made her old tiny space in the Silverstone pack house look like a closet by comparison. She had a bedroom with a bed large enough to sleep 5 people, a sitting room with a fireplace and shelves full of books, and a bathing room with a tub carved from a single piece of marble. She also had attendants, 3 younger wolves named Mira, Ash, and Torrance, who seemed genuinely eager to help her, rather than merely tolerating her presence. But more importantly, she had teachers. Kale brought in specialists from across the territories. A combat instructor named Darius, who taught her how to fight in both human and wolf form, how to use her size and speed to her advantage despite her lack of formal training. A historian named Elder Morrigan, who filled her head with stories of the firstborn, their rise and fall, their powers, and their ultimate extinction. And Vera, patient and kind Vera, who spent hours every day teaching Kale and his inner circle how to communicate in sign language so that Sarah would never be isolated by her silence again. Through it all, Kale was a constant presence. He checked on her between council meetings and treaty negotiations. He joined her for meals whenever his schedule allowed. He walked with her through the fortress gardens in the evenings, not pushing for physical intimacy, but simply being near, letting the mate bond deepen naturally through proximity and shared time. Sarah found herself falling for him in increments, in small moments that added up to something overwhelming. The way he listened when she signed, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked to understand. The way he defended her to his counsel when some of the older alphas questioned the wisdom of having an untrained firstborn in the heart of their territory. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, like she was something precious and rare and worth protecting at all costs. She had never been looked at like that before. She had never been treated like she mattered. And it was addictive. 6 weeks after arriving at Nightborn, Sarah had her first breakthrough with her powers. She was working with Elder Morrigan in the library, studying ancient texts that described how the Firstborn had controlled their abilities, when suddenly the words on the page seemed to rearrange themselves in her mind. It was not about force. It was not about commanding or controlling. It was about connection. Understanding that every wolf was part of the same vast web of instinct and magic, and that her power was simply the ability to touch that web more directly than others could. She tried it immediately, reaching out with her consciousness instead of her will, feeling for the threads that connected her to every wolf in the fortress. And there they were. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. Each one a distinct note in a symphony so complex and beautiful, it made her want to weep. She could feel Kale, his thread burning brighter than all the others, pulsing with power and authority and the unmistakable warmth of the mate bond. She could feel Vera on the training grounds, sparring with Marcus. She could feel Darius in the kitchens, arguing with the head cook about something. She could feel the guards on the walls, the servants in the halls, the children playing in the courtyard. And she understood, finally, that she was not controlling them. She was joining them, becoming part of something larger than herself. When she opened her eyes, Elder Morrigan was watching her with an expression of profound satisfaction. You felt it, did you not? The web, the connection that binds all wolves together. That is the true gift of the firstborn. Not domination, but unity. Not force, but harmony. You do not command others to obey. You invite them to join you in purpose, and they accept because on a fundamental level, they recognize you as part of themselves. Sarah's hands moved excitedly, signing questions about how to strengthen the Siwam. Connection. How to use it without losing herself in the vastness of it. And for the first time since arriving at Nightborn, she felt like she might actually be able to do this. Might actually be able to master these abilities and become someone worthy of standing beside an Alpha King. That night, there was a feast in the Great Hall to celebrate the successful negotiation of a new treaty with the Eastern Pax. Kale had worked for months to achieve the agreement, and the visiting Alphas were all in high spirits, drinking and laughing and making speeches about unity and cooperation. Sarah sat at the high table beside Kyle, dressed in a gown of deep blue that Mira had insisted brought out her eyes, and tried not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of people packed into the hall. She was getting better at being the center of attention, better at ignoring the stares and whispers that followed her everywhere. But it still made her uncomfortable. Halfway through the meal, one of the visiting Alphas, a broad-shouldered man named Aldrich, who ruled the Stonecrest Pack, stood and raised his glass. A toast to our gracious host, Alpha King Kale Nightborn, and to his lovely mate. May their bond be strong, and their reign be long. The hall erupted in cheers and the sound of glasses clinking together, and Sarah felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. But Kale just smiled, his hand finding hers under the table and squeezing gently, and she realized he was proud. Proud to have her beside him. Proud to show her off to the other Alphas. The knowledge made her feel warm all over. Later, after the feast had wound down and the guests had retired to their rooms, Kale walked Sarah back to her chambers. They moved through the quiet halls side by side, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. When they reached her door, She expected him to bid her good night and leave the way he always did, respecting her space and her need to take things slowly. But tonight he hesitated, his hand still on her door handle, his expression conflicted. "Sarah, there is something I need to tell you. Something I have been putting off because I did not want to pressure you, but you deserve to know." She tilted her head, signing the question, and he took a deep breath before continuing. "The mate bond is strong, stronger than I have ever heard of it being. And every day that we do not complete it, every day that we do not join fully, it gets harder to resist. Not because I do not want to wait. I would wait forever if that was what you needed. But because my wolf is becoming unstable. The need to claim you, to mark you, to make you mine in every possible way. It is consuming him. I am afraid that soon I will not be able to control it. And I do not want to hurt you. I do not want to take something you are not ready to give." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she processed his words. She had felt the pull, too. The growing intensity of the bond, the way her body responded to his proximity with a hunger she barely understood. She had been telling herself it was too soon, that she needed more time, that she should be sure before taking such an irreversible step. But the truth was, she was sure, had been sure for weeks, even if she had been too afraid to admit it. She reached up slowly, her hand cupping his cheek, and she saw his eyes flutter closed at the contact. Then she signed with her other hand, spelling out the words carefully. "I am ready. Take me, claim me, make me yours." His eyes snapped open, golden and intense, and she saw the moment he registered what she had said. "Are you certain? Once we do this, there is no going back. You will be mine, and I will be yours, bound together for the rest of our lives. If you have any doubts, any hesitation at all, tell me now." But Sarah had no doubts. She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, pouring everything she could not say into the kiss. Trust and desire and the beginning of something that might, in time, become love. Cale responded instantly, his arms wrapping around her and pulling her flush against him, his mouth moving against hers with a hunger that made her knees weak. He walked her backward through the door, kicking it closed behind them, never breaking the kiss as they stumbled toward the bed. Clothes were shed in a tangle of fabric and fumbling hands, modesty forgotten in the rush of need that consumed them both. When they finally came together, when he sank into her and she gasped at the overwhelming sensation of being filled and claimed and utterly possessed, she felt the mate bond snap into place like the final piece of a puzzle sliding home. It burned through her, branded itself onto her very soul, and she knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same. They moved together in a rhythm as old as time, bodies joined and souls merging, and when the pleasure crested and broke over them both, like a wave, Sarah found her voice, not words, not speech, but a howl, pure and wild and triumphant, that echoed through the fortress and beyond, announcing to every wolf within hearing distance that the Alpha King had claimed his mate, and she had claimed him right back. In the aftermath, as they lay tangled together in sweat-soaked sheets, Cale traced lazy patterns on her skin and pressed kisses to her temple. "You howled. You actually howled. I have never heard anything more beautiful in my entire life." Sarah smiled against his shoulder, feeling more complete than she ever had before, more whole and right and exactly where she was supposed to be. Outside, the full moon rose over Nightborn, bathing the fortress in silver light. And somewhere in the darkness, forces were already moving, already planning, already preparing for the moment when they would test the strength of the bond between the silent wolf and her king. But for now, in this moment, Sarah was content. She had found her voice, her wolf, her power, and her mate. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And the enemies who thought a girl who could not speak would be easy to destroy were about to learn the most important lesson of all. Silence was not weakness. It was the calm before the storm, and the storm was coming. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments, did you see this ending coming?